How's it going, everyone? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to my channel. So now that the Halloween season is finally upon us, we could get into some truly horrifying games that aren't necessarily Shaq Fu. That game was horrifying, but my god, no. I'm talking about some real horror games, and what better way to do so than to go to one of the best survival horror series in the entire market, Resident Evil. You see that right there? That Raccoon City Police Department logo, that RCPD? I don't need no Leon jacket when I got this right here, yeah. But instead of going to some of the older games everybody talks about, let's go to a classic that some people consider one of the best entries of the entire series, Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 4 was released by Capcom for the GameCube in 2005. Despite being the fourth numbered entry of the series, it was actually the sixth major Resident Evil game. Before that, Capcom put out Resident Evil 0 on the GameCube and Code Veronica for the Sega Dreamcast. Originally, the game was supposed to be an exclusive for the Nintendo GameCube, but because of its popularity and a few other factors, it ended up being ported onto the PlayStation 2 and the Nintendo Wii. There are many different ports of Resident Evil 4, some of which I didn't even know existed until I started looking them up for this review. Did you know in Japan there was a mobile version of Resident Evil 4? Seriously, it came out in 2008 and even got an iPad version in 2009. That's pretty nuts, right? Anyway, we also got the game on PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch as part of the HD re-releases from Capcom, which did the same thing for Resident Evil 0 and the original Resident Evil remake. By the way, that's a whole lot of survival horror for you, maybe a little bit too much for some. Okay, enough history of this thing. What's going on with the story in this game? Special Agent Leon Kennedy is sent out on a mission to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, who was kidnapped by a mysterious cult while in Spain. For anybody that's not in the loop, Leon Kennedy is the rookie cop from Raccoon City in Resident Evil 2, who has now started working with the US government. While on his mission, Leon encounters the cult who kidnapped Ashley, who call themselves Los Illuminados and are infected with a parasite called Las Plagas. This causes the villagers of the area to become horrifying zombie-like drones that attack Leon relentlessly at the command of their leader, Osmond Saddler. Things get a lot more complicated afterwards, and Leon finds himself in a desperate struggle to survive long enough to save Ashley from a terrible fate and take down Los Illuminados. The story takes place sometime after the previous numbered Resident Evil games, so there are a few shadows of those events present in Resident Evil 4, including a few familiar faces and references that RE fans will recognize. But does this game stand enough on its own to provide a story and experience you could get invested in, even if you aren't a Resident Evil fan? Now, it's been a while since I fully played through Resident Evil 4, but there are certain elements of this game that hold up really well, even by today's standards. Don't get me wrong, however, there are certain things here and there that haven't aged all too well or really show how far we've come in gaming, but even so, you can really see the blueprint and the beginnings of certain elements in this game that made their way into other Resident Evil titles. One of the more important aspects of this is that Resident Evil 4 feels a little bit more like an action game as opposed to just purely survival horror, which is what a lot of the other PlayStation Resident Evil titles really were at their heart. This is like a good blending of the two, which you got that survival horror element to it. Like, again, there's certain scary moments in RE4, but you also have a little bit much more action-y stuff, which you have a lot more freedom to move around. There's a lot more stuff happening. There's a lot more crazier things that are happening, as opposed to being really slow, methodical, really horrifying, kind of like what RE1 through 3 really were. One thing I do have to say that hasn't aged all too well, guys, is the dialogue. Oh my god, the dialogue in this game is really cringeworthy in certain sections. I know that some Resident Evil fans really enjoy the cheesy dialogue. That's how it was back in Resident Evil 1 through 3, but even so, like, some of these guys that were writing this game could have come up with better stuff. There's just so many cheesy lines. It's like, ugh, you kind of just like squirm a little bit to it. The other thing I should mention is that the codec conversations that Leon has with all these different characters is a straight up rip from Metal Gear Solid. Like, I don't know who at Capcom was playing MGS back in the day, but clearly they pulled that straight from Kojima's camp. Like, it's almost comically embarrassing, like, what they did. Like, you look at it and it's just straight up like, you could just put Snake in there, it'd be almost exactly like how Metal Gear Solid conversations would be.
That's right, she's the daughter of the president, so try to behave yourself, okay? Sagacious as I am, even I get lost here sometimes. Even if it takes your whole life, you'll never get out.
But even with all of that, one of the other aspects of Resident Evil 4 that has really aged pretty gracefully is the gameplay. And for a lot of people, this is the reason why this game is the best in the series. Resident Evil 4 does not play like any of its predecessors that came before. Instead of having a fixed camera with tank-like controls, RE4 gives you a third-person view with a bit more freedom of movement and perspective. For gamers like me, this is far better than what we had from the previous games. Things just felt so restrictive beforehand, with many claiming that it added to the horror-like experience. To be honest, I never felt that this was a good argument for any of the older Resident Evil games, so I was happy to see something completely different done here. This might make the game feel a bit more action-packed, but there are elements of survival horror still present here. You have to manage your items, solve various puzzles to progress forward, and of course, get up close and personal with the horrors that lurk in the dark. Seeing a group of Las Plagas zombies coming at you still gives people the chills, especially when you're doing all you can to keep them at bay. But that doesn't always work out the way that you might hope. For real, check out these times that I died during the game. As chilling as that might be, not everything is great about Resident Evil 4's gameplay. Moving around could still feel a little bit stiff, and aiming will definitely take some getting used to. The precision of your shots is much better this time around, but unless you take the time to pinpoint your shots, you might find yourself in trouble. However, it is pretty cool that you could shoot objects being thrown at you mid-air, as well as enemies jumping or lunging at you before getting hit. Speaking of which, Leon has access to a lot of different weapons throughout the game, with more that you can unlock later on. Every now and then you'll find a mysterious vendor who sells you weapons and items, but will also buy different treasures and objects you find hidden around the stages. You pay for everything in pesetas, which you could gain from taking out enemies or finding it on the ground in boxes that you break. There are times when ammo will be scarce, but I find that Resident Evil 4 to be the most generous of the games when it comes to your weapons. You'll always find a spot with enough ammo to get you out of certain situations, but that doesn't mean that it will be easy. Overall, I really like the gameplay of Resident Evil 4, and happy to see that it eventually influenced other entries of the series later on. Many people still consider this to be one of the best Resident Evil games because of the changes that it implemented. It really was that popular. We honestly wouldn't have releases like Resident Evil Revelations or the remake of Resident Evil 2 we got not too long ago without this game. So my only major nitpick with Resident Evil 4's gameplay is the fact that you have to constantly go into the menus in order to use items. You know, stuff like herbs and other things you have to combine while you're dealing with whatever it is that you're dealing with. The main issue with this is that you have to constantly stop what you're doing, go into the menu, interact with the item, and then get right back into what you're doing. To me, that kills the momentum of the moment. Like, whatever scenario that you're engrossed with, it like stops everything. It's like freezing time in order to do something like really menial and then go right back into the action. The other thing I should mention is that the difficulty spikes with the boss fights, especially towards the end of the game, are really inconsistent. Like, they're all over the place. Now, I understand that that's part of the challenge, especially when you have to be prepared in order to deal with certain boss fights, but some of them are just like all over the place. Again, they're like really out of whack, especially towards the very end of the game where one of the boss fights is stupidly easy, like really incredibly easy. It just looks a lot more intimidating than what it actually is. And then there's one like right before, like 2 fights beforehand, that's like super difficult, like almost unfair, like borderline right there being unfair. And then finally, I should also mention that the puzzles throughout the entirety of the game, if you have a guide with you as you're playing through Resident Evil 4, you'll be totally fine. But I feel like some of these puzzles you're not really going to get on the first couple times. Like, some of them are really clever, really insightful, and you have to really stop what you're doing and really sit down and think about it and try to figure things out. But if you were like me and you played the game with a guide, then again, you'll be totally fine. Like, you just breeze through all these puzzles just by looking at a guide and getting the answers. I mean, why sit there and waste time trying to figure things out when you could just get the answers someplace else and just keep it moving? But now that we've gone through the entirety of the game and we finished all the bosses, we went through the story, what about all that good content, all that extra candy on top of the main game itself? Does Resident Evil 4 still have that stuff? Spoiler alert, yeah, it actually does. So as far as extra content goes for Resident Evil 4, there's a lot of stuff to enjoy, but I do have to point out that a lot of this comes from the later releases of the game, so if you're playing any of the versions released after the Wii version, you're getting just about everything. New costumes, more weapons, and other cool stuff is here just as you expect. If you do well enough in the game, you can even unlock the patented Infinite Rocket Launcher. When you finish the game, you gain access to new modes that give you more story and a bonus minigame. The 2 game modes, Separate Ways and Assignment Ada, follow the sexy assassin femme fatale Ada Wong. Separate Ways has you controlling Ada concurrently with Leon's story, which shows exactly what Ada was doing as Leon was on his mission. It's not too different than what you do in the original game, but does have some new things that you could do as Ada, as well as alternate paths that match up to what was happening to Leon in the original game. It also unlocks the documentary Ada's Report that gives you more details about the story, which die-hard Resident Evil fans will want to know about. On the flip side of this, Assignment Ada is a bit different. Ada Wong needs to infiltrate the island area that you visit towards the end of the main game and find samples of the Las Plagas parasite. You need to gather 5 samples and escape the island to complete the mode. It's a heck of a lot shorter than Separate Ways, but it's probably the more rewarding of the two Ada modes. You get a special cutscene at the end of it that is non-canon to the overarching story, but apparently it's a very hard nod to what would eventually become Resident Evil 5. Not entirely sure if that's the case, but hey, it's a neat cutscene that has the big baddie of the series, Albert Wesker.
Punctual. I like that. Is Krauser there?
He's dead.
Pity. But after all, just another expendable grunt.
The final extra mode that you get is called the Mercenaries, a minigame that has you taking on hordes of zombies. I'll be honest here, I didn't play a lot of this because I just didn't enjoy it that much. You could play as Leon and other characters that are unlocked in this mode, scoring points for every zombie that you destroy within a time limit. The higher that you get your score, the better your rating, which can unlock more characters and even additional weapons. My biggest problem with this, however, is how quickly you could get overwhelmed by the zombies. I get that the idea is to use whatever you have in order to get combos against the zombies that you take out, but at some point you either don't have enough ammo or end up getting hit by attacks you just can't see coming. That got annoying to me after a while, and it happens a lot faster than you might realize. If you do manage to last to the end of the stage and get a high rating, you can unlock a new character to play within the minigame. Do this same thing with every character on every stage with high scores, and you'll get a powerful new weapon to use in the main game. But honestly, I don't feel like it's worth the trouble. So not everything about Resident Evil 4's extra content is super sweet, but even so, you're getting a lot of stuff here, and especially if you're a Resident Evil fan, you've got a lot of stuff to really chew on. But even then, if you're not a die-hard RE fan, there's some stuff that I feel like you're really going to enjoy. And it's kind of refreshing too, because Resident Evil 4 is one of those games from back then that really rewarded you for playing through the entirety of the game. There's a lot of content here that you would get simply by just playing, as opposed to what we would probably get in the modern day of gaming, which pretty much would take a lot of this stuff that RE4 has and regulate it to, like, DLC that comes afterwards, or paid microtransaction stuff, things that will really get on people's nerves. And myself and many others out there that love gaming really long for the days where we could have more games that do stuff like this, that really reward us just for simply playing the games that we love to play, as opposed to dropping a couple big bills just to see everything that a game has to offer. So after everything I've said up to this point, can I recommend that you guys play through Resident Evil 4? Yeah, I actually think the game has aged pretty well, even though certain things about it are dated. Like, again, the dialogue is cheesy, there's certain things that feel a little bit stiff. This actually is still a fun game to play through. There's a lot of extra content afterwards that, while not all of it is a home run, is still very enjoyable, even if you're not a die-hard Resident Evil fan. But if you are a die-hard Resident Evil fan, there's a lot of great stuff related to the RE universe, and a couple other cool little winks and nods that I feel like you're really gonna appreciate. There's some cool stuff in here that, again, if you played any of the other previous games, you're really gonna enjoy. The game has been remarked as a classic of the series, one of the best entries of the entire franchise, and it's for a very good reason. It still holds up even today, and I recommend that if you want to get into the Resident Evil franchise, this is a great game to start out with, even though it might not be the very beginning, but it damn sure has some great stuff going for it. Anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Resident Evil 4. I feel like this was a great pick to choose to review for the Halloween season. It's a much more better pick than freaking Shaq Fu. That garbage of a game. Oh my god, that game is so bad. But I'm glad we finally got to talk about a really good game for the Halloween season, so hopefully you guys have a great Halloween night. You guys have some fun, eat a lot of candy, have a good time overall, play some games, hang out with some friends, and do all the great things that your man JJ would do. Or probably not do, or maybe do, I don't know. Do something crazy, just don't be stupid. You know what I'm saying? Regardless though, those are my thoughts about Resident Evil 4. Let me know what you guys think about it in the comments section down below. Tell me, do you guys love Resident Evil 4? Are you a big RE fan? Do you hate Resident Evil? Do you hate survival horror? Which I don't know why you would even be here, especially with it being Halloween and stuff. Talk about all that stuff down below in the comments section. Thanks for watching this video, everyone. Make sure you guys check out some of these other videos in the boxes after the credits, and don't forget to visit my Patreon page via the annotations for more exclusive content. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel as well. Peace out, and stay epic, everybody.